Scotland has been recognised as the energy capital of Europe. The country is the biggest producer of both renewable and non-renewable energy throughout the continent. The energy industry supports many jobs in the UK. With the goal of reducing emissions to net zero, in 2019 Scottish MSPs passed a bill setting laws including a 75% cut in emissions by 2030. However, the legislation comes with a risk of job losses since the UK's gas and oil supplies in the North Sea currently support 260,000 jobs.
Worked for many different companies, started with BP, or working through an engineering company for BP, and probably most recently finished up with BP, who have, in the last sort of, I want to say 2 years, reduced their scope out of Aberdeen. They've sold quite a few assets. It's probably outside of the UK got quite a bit of life. For those reasons that they don't have they don't have the investment yet to change, and to make the sort of headway that we have in the UK. There should be some life in it and some employment.
To compensate for job losses, the Scottish Government is working towards a smoother transition scheme.
That we were very keen to support transition communities, is what we were calling them. So those communities that are heavily reliant on oil and gas, fossil fuels, and making sure that we're supporting them moving into energy and into supplying energy in the future, basically in a better way. So we were looking specifically around Aberdeen, also looking at Kirkcaldy and at Orkney and Shetland, which are again heavily reliant on that. So making sure that those places had both the support in terms of having Scottish enterprise and things like that assist with supporting that move towards those new technologies, to support with retraining for people, but also looking at making sure that we had the jobs in place and also the technologies in place to make that happen. So I think that was something that was really positive from the Scottish Government's point of view that we were looking to do.
Scotland's vision of becoming among the leaders of the transition to net zero is set in the country's strong renewable energy sector. The latest statistics show that 21% of the overall Scottish energy consumption in 2018 was met by the renewable energy resources, and the target for 2030 is to increase this number to 50%. These resources are onshore wind, offshore wind, and hydro. Beatrice Offshore Wind Farm, which is the largest wind farm in the North Sea, can currently support 450,000 households. The Seagreen Wind Farm, which is under construction off the coast of Angus, will eventually support 1.3 million households. In 2020, between January and March, renewable electricity generation hit a record high of 11.6 terawatts an hour, which is almost equivalent to half of Scotland's total energy consumption for a year. There is a hope for Scottish cities, such as Aberdeen, to become the capital of renewables in the future.
But I'm also slightly concerned that Aberdeen has historically been reliant on one industry. And the problem is that when you get an oil and gas price crash, like we've seen a number of times, these things go in cycles, then you have the whole city being impacted as a result. So whether you work in oil and gas and you're impacted because you're being made redundant or your pals are being made redundant, or whether you work in Sainsbury's and you're being impacted because the amount of people shopping in Sainsbury's is reducing and they're buying less expensive stuff.
The reality is that the UK is still quite reliant on oil and gas. This sector supports 110,000 jobs, which is 6 times more than the number of jobs in the renewable sector. To transfer these jobs to the expanding renewable sector, retraining of the workforce is essential.
So what we were doing in relation to the last oil and gas price crash, when there was a huge number of people being made redundant, there was support provided through SDS, which is Skills Development Scotland, and that support was provided in order to allow people to retrain into other jobs. So it wasn't specifically you must retrain into the renewable energy sector, because actually I don't think at that point there was really enough jobs to justify doing that, if you see what I mean. So if they were retrained into renewable energy, there needs to be a job for them to go to. There's no point in just training them. So that training was specifically around job specific training, so assisting people to gain new skills that would allow them to get a job.
It is important to ask how accessible are the government's retraining schemes for people whose jobs are affected by the net zero transition?
So the skill set should be very transferable. The reality is it hasn't worked like that quite. Now, that's from me on a personal level, probably because I was engaged in a way that I was focused on one particular area. And to some extent, we were, in terms of employment, we're always told, yeah, there's loads of work, don't worry, things will change. And then suddenly, as far as BP goes, they've reduced the headcount by 10,000 people. Renewables, that's been, from my perspective, rumbling on in the background at some pace, I might add. I've been surprised to see, when you fly over the North Sea nowadays, you don't see oil and gas rigs the same and platforms, but you see huge swathes of wind farms, which is quite surprising. You think, well, when did all that go in? So the industry has been going at a fair pace, and I'd probably been left behind, but the skill sets are the same.
Yeah.
I think what's held a lot of oil and gas people back is the certification you have to work in those businesses.
TYS News, Glasgow.